Thank you, everyone, for filling. When I arrived, these were very, very empty-looking seats. So thank you. I appreciate that. Now we've also been tussling with technology, which, as we're all pretty much to a man and woman talking about technology here, it's always the last thing that we get set up. So I have a human clicker to my right. Well, I would just keep nodding when we need to move on a slide. Apart from that, the audio works, all the visuals work, and hopefully everything else, including myself, will work. I haven't eaten anything today, so I could keel over at any point. So, my name's Dean Johnson. I'm the head of innovation at a company called Brandwidth. And our head office is based in London. We have another office in Windsor in the UK and another office in San Francisco. We are, for want of a better word, an end-to-end agency. Now that sounds very, very vague usually, because that tends to mean you do a little bit of everything but not any of it particularly deeply. What we actually do is all of the things from end to end very, very deeply. Now VR is just one of those. Now we've been working in VR for a long time now actually, so I will give you the nod works. And so from my point of view as head of innovation, I get to play with lots and lots of interesting tech and gadgets and goodies. VR has been one of those that I've been playing with probably more than any piece of technology, because randomly playing Star Wars in the background there, fine. Oh, it's okay, the Star Wars is coming up in this. That's what confused me. That wasn't a nod, by the way, but just go back. Back a slide, back a slide. And we're back. So VR for the last 3 years has been the next big thing. So whereas my job revolves around talking to people about the next big thing, it almost seems as if we've been stuck. Because 3 years ago, VR was the next big thing for developers. It was a chance to get under the skin of it, work with it, start to get to know how it was going to work. And this was obviously VR 2.0. You know, we produced our first piece of VR 17 years ago, back, you know, the first time around when it was considerably less relevant, but no less exciting. So VR has been stuck in those 3 years. 2 years ago, it was relevant to brands to start to look at it and say, well, actually, how do we start to engage with this? What do we do? So they started to produce things just to be associated with it. And then in the last 12 months, consumers have got their hands or heads on pieces of cardboard, literally cardboard. And the launches have kind of rolled on from one after another with useful headsets like Gear VR and Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. So this last 12 months has been the most relevant, but it's the next 12 that we really do start to talk about the next big thing, and I hopefully move on to the next big thing. Now, if you join me on the innovation stage later, you will hear about all of those other technologies, but today, and this is very much about VR. So all of this tech here I get to play with very, very early stages, things like the Nokia Ozo. We were working with Nokia under the skin of this before everybody else got their eyes on it. And admittedly, when it first came out, it wasn't the rounded product that it is now. But what it does now is not only do the job very, very well, but when you're talking about VR production, it means you don't turn up with a bunch of GoPros on a stick. Now, for anyone that's willing to spend decent money on something that goes beyond 360 to full VR, some GoPros on a stick doesn't look very professional. Now this does. This kind of delivers on that, which is good for us. So it means the industry is getting some pace and momentum. So next up, I get to play with a lot of this stuff. One thing I did earlier this year was to spend 24 hours in VR. And so we're talking about user experience. This was kind of the ultimate virtual user experience. Now I wouldn't recommend any of you do that. It was a completely stupid thing to do. But possibly the most annoying thing was the week after, someone got the Guinness World Record for the longest time in VR for 25 hours. So I'm not bitter about that at all. I am. But you know what that actually taught me was part of the user experience for VR is knowing that you are putting a headset on. So you are aware of going into a virtual environment. So I thought if I could spend that amount of time in VR, I could actually fall asleep and wake up. And one of the most surprising things was when you woke up was you didn't know, it wasn't that you didn't know where you were, you just believed you were whatever you could see. So it's like waking up in an unfamiliar hotel room. You're still in that hotel room, but you can't necessarily remember where it is. But in waking up in VR, you have none of that ceremony of putting on the headset, none of that knowledge that you are going into an experience rather than virtually taking you there. So as soon as you remove that, it is stunning. It's confusing, but it is stunning. Now, next up, before we click on this one, this is a video of, again, pushing the boundaries. 2 years ago, we were testing Oculus Rift for potential with Star Wars. Now, again, big Star Wars fans. We worked on Star Wars Scene Maker, which you'll see some of in a second. You know, great opportunity to put people in iconic scenes from Star Wars. You take J.J. Abrams, or George Lucas's position as the director, recreate those scenes or your own versions of them. You know, when we had the chance then to get hold of the technology for VR, why would you then not want to put yourself in those scenes? You know, incredible ways to do that. But rather bizarrely, I was having a lightsaber battle with myself on stage, which, again, pushing boundaries. So yes, now not a normal character from Star Wars, I admit. This was Captain America, who was my alter ego at the conference, and rather unfortunately, he then beat me and killed me at the conference. So, but this was about, you know, how do we push those boundaries to take, you know, the physical experience, and this is something that will become apparent in those next 12 months. This is the first Christmas we'll reach, you know, the first holiday period that will actually have big sales of quality kit. So Sony have done an amazing job of getting quality kit and the things that drive it out at the right time when people are going, okay, this is the time of year I spend some money. But actually more than that, that physical environment is the thing that will start to drive sales, because you won't get anywhere near the sales that you get, but actually you will get millions of videos out there of Granny punching the dog and someone falling in a Christmas tree, and all of the things that are associated with those YouTube gold moments where you're seeing people now reacting to roller coasters and all of the things that we can experience. But you know, that in itself is entertainment, but the roll-on effect of that is people will say, hang on a minute, that's virtual reality. So big audience from that. So 17 years ago was our first piece of VR. So we've flown pretty much under the radar since then, working on amazing things from, say, Star Wars to putting people on planet surfaces to in the middle of music events and to Doctor Who. So, you know, these are incredible opportunities with great products and great properties that are familiar in a certain extent as well, because if you're going to place someone in an environment, you want them to not have an amazing culture shock, so that's the thing they remember. Actually, what they want to remember is, you know, some kind of familiarity. I don't know what should be here. Oh, yes, okay. And very briefly, I will skirt over most of this. So this, again, from the user experience point of view, the great thing with VR was taking lots of acquired knowledge over the years of Brandwidth, and from all of these apps you see behind us here, from Guinness World Records to music apps to children's interactive storybooks to Doctor Who to you know, The Doors and Led Zeppelin, and you know, incredible properties again. But knowing how that audience interacts with it is a key part. So it's not just having something incredible in front of you, but knowing that someone, once they are there, they're engaged and they come back. And VR particularly is about that return journey. So it's not just dipping in and out. And a lot of it will be dipping out initially, but you know, to sustain that as a business platform, we need to make sure people are going to come back and either buy or re-experience that content. So, one of the great things about VR is the learning potential. So, to extend that experience to say, you know, not just looking at something on a screen that we've previously been detached from, but actually feeling as if you were there, as if that was your experience. You know, we have knocking on 80% retention for something that we have done compared to something that someone else has just told us about. So even within the company, we're across the 3 offices, we'll occasionally brief in virtual reality. So this was me in a car giving an automotive brief. One of the great things about doing that in a car was they don't have to look at me all the time. They can actually look around out the front of the car and something else. But it does mean that the people all felt as if I was there in the room briefing them. Whether that was good or not, I'm not entirely sure. Okay. And then Stereocast, finally from our pieces, Stereocast is something that we're looking at is, again, VR up till now has had lots of disconnected content. So forgetting the actual experience of that content, the experience of finding it and coming back to it and collating it and curating it, that's very, very disconnected and disjointed. So you'll go to YouTube for one thing here, and you'll download an app for something else there, and you'll go onto another software platform for this. What we're trying to do with this, to think about the TV show in general, is not to make a VR TV show for people that are interested in VR, but genuinely take things into that environment that people are interested in. So music, or supercars, or travel, and that in itself, 15, 20 minutes aggregates all of that random content to a new audience that has had no experience of virtual reality. So we're not, the expectation is not that they will go out and find it. We're able to deliver that. And for, sponsorship opportunities and, actually getting a message across, it's a great way to weave that into what can, potentially turn into a really decent TV format. So, now I wanted to give you some examples of what's kind of currently working and what isn't. Now, I say from what isn't, I will get onto that in a second, but because we have the luxury at Brandwidth of that end-to-end proposition. So we're not a fully focused VR agency. Now, I know I often speak at these events and I'm up against people and that is their sole purpose. There's nothing wrong with that, but they have to make sure that VR is part of the bigger picture. And in doing so, we have the luxury of saying no to lots of things. And there's a lot of stuff that shouldn't be VR at the moment. Now, we've all gone through phases of a long time ago when everyone needed a website. A lot of the people that at the time didn't, but of course we all do now. Same with apps. We all went through a real phase of everyone needs an app. Why do you need an app? I don't know, but everyone needs an app. Now we know what works for mobile optimized web and what works for apps and what works on other platforms. There's still obviously a huge market for a bespoke app build, but not everyone needs that. Now we got to the point with VR where, of course, we're speaking at CEO level with someone who's been advised by their nephew that they should have some VR because they saw it on somebody else's Vive. Now there's no rationale behind that at all, other than everyone else is having some. Why shouldn't we have some? So here's some good examples, first off, of what's kind of working. So top left here, we've got a great piece by The Third Floor for Ridley Scott, The Martian. A lot of conversation is around how does film come into all of this, and one of the ridiculous headlines is this is the future of film. Now it's not the future, it is a future for film. Now for one reason, it's financially unacceptable to record every movie, every blockbuster movie, or every movie, no matter what the budget, normally in full virtual reality. Some things would just never get made if that's the case. Now, other things just don't need to be in that. Now, Police Academy 4, I would never have needed to watch that in virtual reality. But, on some others, on their merits, the way you film in virtual reality is there's no hiding a cameraman somewhere. Whereas we shoot and the director decides where you look, and he hides all of the rest of the stuff away behind the camera. We don't have that luxury with virtual reality. We have to think ahead, we have to plan ahead, and everybody has to go and run behind something else to make that work. But it's not just that, it's also how do you then guide that storytelling? So how do you make sure, how do you ensure that someone is looking where you are directing that action? So again, a lot of the great cinematic gems would never have been made if we were forcing things into the category of the future of film is VR. No, what this does is it greatly complements cinema. So we get a 3-minute round from Rocky, for example, or we get the beach landings on Saving Private Ryan. Or we get something like this, which becomes the interactive element that goes along with the movie, like The Martian. Now, the great thing here was you got to perform some of the tasks if you were on the planet's surface. But the really good thing was you can see on the edges here is your view actually plays on the fact that you have this lump of plastic on your face, which, you do suspend belief to a certain point. But if you're playing to that, the strengths of that, and the oppression and the feeling as if there's that claustrophobic element to wearing a space helmet, that's a really good way to do it because it adds yet another layer of depth to it. So they did a really good job of that. And what they did, where it worked nicely here was because there was lots of CGI content. So they were able to easily translate that to an interactive piece of story rather than it being a full just video piece. Then over here, if we can, sorry, let me just do a quick click. This one here is on a headset called the Sulon Q. Oh, it was. That was a quick play. Did that just cut off? Okay, might keep going. As soon as I turn my back, it'll probably go off again. No, we're all right. So the Sulon Q is now I do actually hate the term mixed reality, simply because it's so confusing, because it applies to so many different things at the moment. That's a debate for another day, or I might get onto it if we've got time. But what this genuinely does is it supplies a virtual reality headset with twin stereoscopic cameras on the front, so that they deliver an augmented view of what you see around you. Now that's actually a better way of doing things than trying to make the current augmented reality headsets display virtual, because you can't just blank out everything and put someone in a virtual environment on those headsets. But you can do it the other way around. Now what's stunning with this is it's full room scanning, and the example here is you see in front of you your own floor, your own room, and these magic beans grow out of your, the beanstalk in Jack and the Beanstalk grows out of your floor. And what it does, it then breaks through your ceiling. So you see your ceiling tiles, your Artex, whatever is on the ceiling, break down. And because it's fully wireless, you walk around and you look up through the hole in your ceiling, and you see the giant looking down at you. So this, you utterly believe that you are there and these things are there in your environment. And then the giant, because it can then take you to full VR, reaches down into your room, grabs you and pulls you up into full virtual reality. Now that is stunning. I mean, the first example I saw of this was kind of a glowing portal in a room. And you see your room, you walk up to the portal, and first thing you just timidly push your head through. And as you do that, you go into full virtual reality. So it's this kind of Lord of the Rings scene on the other side. And the first thing you do is go, shit, and you pull yourself back out again, and you're straight back in your room. Stunning, stunning stuff, and a really, really nice way to start thinking about how we mix those user experiences for virtual and augmented, rather than taking it on a hardware basis the other way around. So, next up we've got down here is the opportunity to actually step into... Oh, what are you trying to fix it? It's all gone wrong. That was great timing for all the audio to come from the other stage, wasn't it? Okay, you got the clip. So we could have a technological clicker. It's amazing how we still call them clickers, isn't it? Is it alive? Right, quick, what's on screen? So step into Salvador Dali's artwork. A great opportunity then, so not just to learn about it, but to start to fantasize about how we could take great pieces of artwork and move them on and bring them to life to another dimension. And then down in the bottom corner here, we've got at Thorpe Park in the UK, we've got a ghost train experience. So, horror is one of those incredible areas where you can not only visually affect an environment, but psychologically affects the user. And there we're using HTC Vive and frightening the crap out of people by zombies and everybody else wandering around, but actually people dressed up in those environments. So it becomes a physical environment. So you sit in this train, and the things that you see, you can also touch, or you feel them touching you. It scares the living daylights out of people. And then one other great example here is that we're kind of talking about those years that have run up to... Is that coming from in here? Is that next door? Oh. Okay. I'm glad we're in here. Right, so this is a great example of using virtual reality for PR and marketing purposes, because this experience was never actually available to us, the general public. But what Castrol did here with Ford was to give a virtual car racing challenge. So two drivers were pitted against each other, and they could see this environment, entire fantasy environment. and they could see each other, but they weren't on the track at the same time. So they then competed against each other. But the beauty here was that they, to the millimetre, tracked where those cars were. So the full experience of, we talk about motion sickness and the problems we encounter and we still will do for the foreseeable future. The fact of something appearing to move in a certain direction, but we're not. These guys, it was doing exactly what they saw. Great opportunity and a wonderful way to test the tech. But of course, it was all about the case study for Castrol. Because we couldn't experience it, but it was about saying, look at the potential and the possibilities for this, and they really did exhaust that. Okay. And then finally, on the good stuff, we've got Land's End here by us too. Great. I mean, they were responsible for Monument Valley. Their background in gaming and interactivity is superb. This was one of the first games that I felt compelled to actually complete. I mean, I used to play games years ago, and then family and kids and all sorts got in the way, and I wasn't allowed to anymore. But this, I sat at Christmas, and I went from one end, not in one go, but I completed the whole thing. Puzzles, it was brilliant. And now, one of the great things about it was the stylistic environment, because we talk about the user experience, trying to replicate everything not initially in the real world, but then advancing that to the fantasy environments and everything else. We're not there yet for a human face in that environment. So as soon as you switch into something that doesn't appear genuine, doesn't appear real in that virtual reality, it breaks that illusion. But this doesn't, because it's so stylized, you just accept that as being the environment, because you're not trying to replicate something. Brilliantly well done. And then finally over here is the Void. Now, I don't know how familiar any of you are with this. Now, this, for me, one of the problems I face is I'm utterly ruined once I've had incredible virtual reality, or whatever the technology I'm testing experiences. So when I go from something like this back to cardboard seems awful. But actually, it's not. So people haven't tested virtual reality before, they haven't experienced it at all, and the first experience is in a piece of cardboard with their own phone, their mind is still blown. But when we get the luxury of testing things like the Void, now I'll explain the Void is, they are based in Utah, they essentially have a physical environment. So it's a little bit like the Ghost Train, but it's much more advanced than that. So you wear a full haptic vest, you put on their own headset, which has got a wider field of view than pretty much anything out there, and you walk around in an environment. So I'll give an example. It's kind of an Indiana Jones Temple of Doom style temple. You walk in, and the first thing you see is a wall. So you know beforehand that this is how it works, so you touch the wall. But that in itself is amazing, because it's the wall that you see, you feel. Now, you move on, and as you walk past a kind of a brick wall, the whole vista collapses, and you see the jungle out in front of you, and air comes in. You feel the breeze on your face. So again, it takes you in another level of immersion. You walk a bit further, and you see flaming torches along the wall, and as you walk past each one, you feel the heat of the torch. So that is amazing. Now, you then take it to, you think that's all incredible, but you take it to another level, and you put someone else in there with you. So essentially, you can't see their face, but you're kind of spacesuit, tag team for shooting aliens and things, but you see and feel the gun that you're holding. You get the recoil from that, and then the haptic suit comes into play, where you get hit by things and things touch you. And this level of immersion is that utter suspension of disbelief. You really believe you are there. And I mean, their latest piece, I'm out in New York in a couple of weeks, although I was testing this with them ages ago, that I haven't yet been to the Ghostbusters experience that they have in New York at Madame Tussauds, which again has moved things on brilliantly, because it's that supernatural tie-in, works superbly well, and the people and the things you see in there are the people that you go in with. Great potential for the future. Not scalable, because we're not going to be at home with anything like this kind of kit for a long time, but what it does is it's kind of like the Laser Quest of VR, which is not doing them any justice at all, but their aim is to build centres that has a high turnover and people go in for the ultimate virtual reality experience. Great stuff, and can't commend it highly enough. So then the bad stuff. Now, I've only got one example of bad stuff because I do get moaned at quite a bit for being the grumpy old man of virtual reality. Now, that is awful, isn't it? But a lot of the things I get to talk about is shit. It's awful, awful stuff. And I spend a lot of my time, and to be quite honest, it's more interesting to people and more useful to a lot of people to tell them what to avoid, what not to do. And then you get to highlight the gems that are there. So this is an example. So this was part of the press release that was sent out by Kellogg's. A multi-sensory virtual reality experience in 360-degree video that tracks and replicates a user's movement in real time. So this was sent out to the consumer press to print that statement. Now this was 6-9 months ago at least. So the audience wouldn't have a second, wouldn't understand what that was all about. So this is what we were also faced with as the visual. So it's Ancient Legends cereal, breakfast cereal. Now this comes back to one of those conversations where I would have just said no. I would have just said no. Now it wouldn't have been no, go away. We're not big on turning everything away, but it would have been no, make it one of these instead, or it should be this, or at least choose a different cereal. Now, the experience they were faced with, this was the PR shot. So this was the one that you were faced with. Yeah. So she's there, clean, beautiful, and goes using this spoon. Yeah. Oh, that's Cleopatra. That's amazing. I'm going to go into a temple. So, but this, in reality, they were given a bib. They were also faced with 2 controllers. Now, I don't know about you. I'd never eat cereal with a knife and fork. Now, also, the reason they're given a bib is because when they pick those up, they do this. You don't see that in the photos, do you? No, but what you do see is this amazing thing here. So we've taken what we're doing is we're giving you the opportunity to eat cereal with Cleopatra, something that I would never have asked for. I can't imagine anyone would have. And then, what they then delivered was the 360 experience on Facebook. So at least when you went in VR, you saw those funny floating things in front of you. But now, in 360, all you've got is a floating spoon, because there's not even a person in there anymore. And that means nothing. But what it does mean is 1.1 million views. Job done, fine, ticked a box, and everyone moved on. Now that was the result that they internally thought this was great. We're going to do that again. Please don't do that again. Now these kind of experiences are the problem that we face with VR. Now I get asked a lot, the roller coaster of virtual reality. What's the next big thing? What are we going to be doing in 20 years' time? And again, coming back to being negative about these things, I say we do have the potential to screw this up. If we do too many bad things, the audience that still isn't there, there's nowhere near being there, will say, I'm not going to bother with this. This is awful. I'll go back to those other things. Right now, VR is not indispensable. Like our smartphones, they're indispensable. Our internet access on a whatever computer or the car that we drive, most of these things are indispensable. If you took them away, we'd be flailing around. We wouldn't know what to do. You take VR away, for us that know what it is, we kind of get it, we'd be disappointed and we'd be, quite upset about the whole thing, but we would find something else. Now, until you make sure that we've got it to the point where we take that away, and in education, the kids aren't learning in the same ways and with all that potential that they could do. The film, the addition to that piece, people aren't going, where's my Blu-ray or DVD extra equivalent? We haven't got there yet, so stop making crap that will put people off. And we don't want that message, but what we want is the message to everyone that hasn't tried VR to be, try VR, it's amazing. What we don't want is, I tried eating some cereal, it's pointless, just don't even bother. Or we will, in the kind of 2 or 3 years' time, this will be a decline rather than the amazing potential that we have at the moment. Okay. So then, big no on that one. I think you might have guessed that one. Okay. Right, so the more useful things for you guys, a lot of that is rambling, there's a lot of that is learnings. However, these are the most useful points. So, point number 1, VR is not alone. So I've made that point that as a company, that's beside the point. It doesn't matter how big you are, which piece of that you are delivering. Virtual reality cannot exist on its own. So the end game can't be much the same as the app market used to be. We would work with clients who had an app budget. And they spent all of the app budget and then went, oh, now what do we do? Well, that app budget should have been part of your marketing budget or part of your project budget that already had marketing and advertising and promotion and social conversation associated to it so that people knew it existed. You can't just make it and hope people will come to you. So VR needs to sit in the middle of this, and being in the middle, that means you push people to it and you tell them why it is amazing, why, you know, what they will get out of it. And then the what they will get out of it piece is, you know, how do they take something away from that? So do you make short form, episodic, subscription-based film? Now there's potential there because that becomes a market that you can actually monetize, because at the moment to charge the equivalent of you know, a Blu-ray purchase or a film download, we're not there yet because the content and the length of the duration of viewing isn't there yet. So the audience is used to paying for micropayments or subscriptions. So, you know, that is a way to lock people in so they come back again, but also allow them in some way to socialize that. So VR is, for me, is one of the easiest things and one of the toughest things to talk about. Now, it's really easy, as I've I hope I've demonstrated here. I can talk for hours, and no idea how long I've been talking. I could talk for hours about this, but the toughest thing is actually getting people's eyeballs on the content. You can't just send someone a link. At these early days, we can't just send someone a link and expect them to be able to view it if they haven't got a headset of any shape or form. Until we get over that, it's going to be a tough one. So you then have to say, well, how do they share that? So we have to consider about promotions and ways of branded cardboard or pushing people to a retailer that has an option to view something. So again, that VR can't just be in the center. Now, that may be that you take steps, and the first piece you put out there, much like the Kellogg's, is a piece of 360 video that lives in Facebook. That becomes shareable. And then you tease with, well, that's just a taster of this. If you want the full virtual experience, go here and start to experience it. So, you know, there's VR, you can make some great stuff, but you can't just make some great stuff that lives on its own. And then too, so I touched on familiarity earlier a little bit about now for the user experience, and this comes down to, you know, the user interface as well. You can't just drop someone into a completely confusing environment. Now, it could be that it's quite literally an alien environment, which is fine, but they need to know what they do with it. If it's interactive, they need to know how they interact. And this becomes a way of making it interaction in the very simplest form, simply because your audience could be on just a piece of cardboard. So that interaction could be staring at something, or simple kind of taps. Or it could be the full interactive end of something like an HTC Vive, where you get to walk around and you have hand controllers and all sorts of things. But you can't always build for that smaller audience. You need to think about the smaller one, so the bigger potential of something like cardboard. So don't overcomplicate things. Don't overcomplicate those environments. Same with just even a piece of video. Think about how you know, don't just give someone something with everything happening at the same time in an entire environment just because you can. Make sure that they feel at ease with the way that they can look at things, and they feel that that's on their own terms, so it feels interactive to that point. And then passive versus interactive. So these, you know, that, as I've just said, the interactive point is very much the kind of, as we see at the moment, the gaming approach. That's the easy way to describe it. So then we take things onto something like Tilt Brush with the ability to create in an environment, and that becomes something that, you know, it could only ever be interactive, but it's got so much potential. So I touched on that point about education earlier, and if you took VR away from education right now, it's still not indispensable. But if you start to introduce into design and technology and art something like Tilt Brush, you know, that doesn't need to be much more than that, but suddenly the potential opened up to kids to learn because they can create in a 3D space. Amazing opportunities. Now, 6 months down the line, if enough of those ended up in education, that would start to become indispensable. Now, education is fine, but even in a design studio, and a studio of any size, it could be a kind of a 3-man band or the studio inside a global network, that again is a great way to open up your mind. The first time I tried Tilt Brush as a designer it was mind-blowing, because you could be in and around your own creation. Fantastic way to do things. And then of course the passive way of looking at that again is naturally you think about video, you think about the lean back. Now, not everything needs to be interactive. There are so many experiences, we can place people at the top of Mount Everest or the bottom of the deepest ocean. We don't need to catch the fish there, and we don't need to plant the flag ourselves for it to still be amazing. And that kind of level of lean back, lean in is something that we'll gauge as we go along. And some experiences may well change as the audience becomes more demanding. And then depth. So back to my grumpy face again. This is another argument that I have a lot about what. So people say, what is VR? So my description would be there are essentially three levels. The first one isn't VR, and that's 360 video, but that's monoscopic 360 video. So that in that form has been around for years. So we had the opportunity to look round, estate agents, virtual windows to look around all sorts of houses and things, and that's an actual benefit. That's quite useful. What it isn't is virtual reality. Just by putting it in a VR headset doesn't make it VR. It makes it an interesting 360 experience in a virtual reality headset. When you start to take things up to full stereoscopic, you add depth, and most importantly, you add presence. So 360 monoscopic video is essentially like a big orb that rotates around you. Whereas if it's stereoscopic, if it's using the equivalent and has been shot in the equivalent of using your two eyes, it gives the sense of three-dimensional depth. And that depth means that you feel as if you are in an environment rather than seeing that environment around you. And suddenly that moves you on to being the experience that VR, and then unlocking all of that potential. So again, it's a little bit like that, not making crap, but making sure that the good stuff is the right stuff. And that's a technical level. Now, there's nothing wrong with 360 video, but if you have the opportunity, shoot it stereoscopic and take it down to 360, because suddenly that is your audience. That's the big audience. Like the Facebook example, that's Facebook. That works. And then you tease the example of genuine VR. And of course, if it's interactive, then we've got all of those opportunities with things like Unity of making just via plugins that stereoscopic view and that environment. So, they're the three levels will be 360 monoscopic, 360 stereoscopic, and then the full interactive. But I'm not in the naming process. Now, lots of my what should I call them, peers, are very much fixed on wanting to be responsible for naming something in virtual reality right now. They want to get hold of the tag that's calling interactive virtual reality pure VR. So that somehow suggests that J.J. Abrams could shoot a high-definition 360 stereoscopic view of the Millennium Falcon as it flies through an incredible scene from Star Wars, and that wouldn't be pure VR. That'd just be slightly rubbish VR. Hang on a minute, no, that would still be VR. So remove the pure. It's just interactive or passive VR. I've just added passive to that. That's just a description. That's not a phrase for it. Now, I did say I was going to not talk about augmented, virtual, and what's the one? Mixed reality in the middle. Now, mixed reality as a phrase has been around for decades because there's so many ways to mix some kind of reality, which is all fine. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, what they're faced with right now is everyone screaming augmented reality and virtual. So augmented reality is great, again, has been around for years, and then Pokemon Go suddenly made everyone associate the technology with the phrase. Now, ask a consumer, most consumers, what's augmented mean, and most of them will just kind of go, is that thing from Pokemon Go? And that's probably, they won't actually describe what augmented means, and they shouldn't have to. So, on this hand, we have, I would use this hand, but I moved the microphone away. This hand, we have augmented reality, and here we have virtual reality. All fine. So, what's mixed reality? Well, mixed reality is it's different things to different people. If you ask Magic Leap, they will then go on to describe augmented reality. Because that's what it is. So they say, well, but it's about taking content into the environment that you see. That's what augmented reality does. It's not just an overlay, it's not Google Glass. For years we have progressed with how augmented reality works, and we have made it much, much better at, its awareness of an environment. And then you ask someone else and they say, well, actually it's using green screen, and you show an environment where someone's in HTC Vive and you see what they see. So you see the person there, and because we've used a green screen, it's like they're inside that, that virtual experience. No, that's a video of someone using virtual reality. That's not then mixed reality. So there's two completely opposite definitions for mixed reality. Now, I don't have a problem with the term. In fact, I think it's a brilliant term for consumers. If you, instead of using augmented, we just had said, yeah, augmented has now become mixed reality, that's fine. So that's not necessarily a debate for here, other than to say that there's a lot of confusion out there. And again, the things that will make this go away is if you have confused consumers and they say, oh, what am I trying, one of these or one of those? And if it's too much hard work, they'll go and try something else completely. And then number 5. Okay, it's good. Number 5, so aspiration and audience. So I kind of touched on this as well. So you think about design, create, conceptualize, imagine for this void audience with the physical environment, with the haptics, with the, all of the accessories, all of those goodies, that full interactivity. However, build for this audience, because that is the big audience that needs to get eyeballs on your content really early on. But yeah, don't ever lose this, because at some stage all of this is going to be brought up to here. And this is the most important for creativity and imagining that kind of whole user experience. That's the 5 in summary. So we've just rattled through those. So I just wanted to add a little bit beyond that. So obviously not alone, familiarity, actually some kind of semblance to my ramblings on those. I'll let you all snap a picture, but I'll circulate this afterwards. Okay. And then finally, I do tend to bring my children out at these events, not physically, I didn't bring them over on the plane, but my poor children always get technology inflicted on them at a very early stage. So VR is one of those things. Now Hattie is now 7. She first tested VR when she was 3. I'm utterly irresponsible as a parent, clearly, because the one thing that we never talk about here, and I won't really go into any depth about it now in case it frightens too many people off, is the psychological and the medical sides of VR. We all just go, yeah, put that on, fine. I spent 24 hours in there, there's nothing wrong with me. But there's been all sorts of scare stories recently about sharing headsets. Again, why would we normally go, I'm just going to wipe this all over your face and then put it on mine? Wouldn't normally do it, but we are. It's all fine. So then my poor kids get inflicted all of this technology on them. So this, just to give some background, I asked Olivia a few years ago, what's the future of mobile technology? This was the future for her. So we're back to this, that's better use of Kellogg's time, one of those on your head. Now, that's how she saw it. She thought, oh, actually, she's quite observant there. And it was kind of her forerunner into hands-free and Google Glass, and that's how she described it anyway. And then the next question was, what's the future of wearables? So it's like, oh, it's just, I've got telescopic eyes, I can just, everything's built in so that we can just see everything in the distance without needing anything else. And then they both, between them, had some kind of interactive ring, and Hattie's vision of the smartwatch, she was well ahead of Apple. Look at that, that does everything, and the battery never runs out. It's amazing. And then finally, to end on Olivia and Hattie's thoughts for VR, I asked them the question, what if you, I didn't use we're talking about user experience here, I didn't use the words user and experience because that would be stupid with my kids. I just said, if you could have something built in VR, what would you do? So,
I want to fly, I want to swim, and I want to run really far.
What else would you like to do?
Hover.
Hover? Like on a hoverboard?
Yeah.
So you could go back to the future?
Yeah, and I want to have Back to the Future cars.
You should make a game that when there's a book on the floor and then you have to jump into it and it teleports you to the jungle, and then a tribe comes up to you and they give you a book and then you put it on the floor and then you jump into it again and then it takes you to like space or a desert or somewhere else exciting, or maybe like a medieval castle. I would like to fly over the roofs with Mary Poppins, and I would like to play with the Muppets and go on stage with them and go la 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 choo 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 choo. And I would like to turn into a bat and fly it like in Hotel Transylvania, and be one of the two Ronnies. You could also make a game where it's about phobia. So if you have a phobia of the dark, you put the headset on, and you're just in a really dark, spooky place, and then like it keeps on doing it, and then like you do it like once or twice a day, and then you get used to it, and then like your phobia is gone. And you could also do it where you're in a lift, and you're all squashed up with other people, like claustrophobia. And then there could also be one where you're in a basement, and then if you're scared of rats and mice, they're just like, you hear them and then you just see one run in front of you, and then like a rat and then a mouse, and then they like one climbs up you, and then you go nibble 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 nibble, and then you're like nibble. And then there could be another one where you go into a shed, and then and there's spiders everywhere, and then you look down, and then the player's hands are out, and then like there's someone comes in and they put a tarantula on your hand, and then you have to stay there and look at it, and then you do that for ages. And then if you got a phobia of dead animals like me, you could be walking through a forest, and then you see lots of dead animals, and then you have to go up to it and poke it. I want them to be all clear white or whatever colour you want them to be, then with big rubber spikes and little green dilly-bobbers.
I want these things to be a bit more exciting and furry and purple, have wobbly things.
Right, thank you on Olivia and Hattie's behalf there. What started out as being all of those fantasy things about what you can do for film and games and everything else, it was utterly unprompted about how it actually moved on to things about phobias, and talk about how horror can affect you psychologically. Well, actually you put that in reverse and put someone in an environment where they know they can't be actually physically touched by them, but the mental ability to control that is a fascinating way of thinking about phobias. Now, all sorts of highly paid, well-trained academics have since my kids have suggested that, have now gone, no, I've thought of this first. Really, the whole point there is to say, look, collaborate, no matter who it's with, even if it's with my kids. Collaborate with whoever does whatever best. One of the questions I've had recently was, what's the future of virtual security and online payments in those kind of environments? Well, luckily we work with visas and the the world pays of the world. So we work on that in a safe environment. Don't ask someone that makes 360 videos that turns up with GoPros on a stick, what's the future of online banking and security in a virtual environment? They may well be able to film some of the stuff that goes on in there, but make sure they collaborate with the people that are experts in their fields. So again, how we extend VR and the future of it and how it's a sustained environment is making sure that all of us are doing the things that we're best at. So whether it's Hattie and Olivia have got a future in this or not, or they end up being brain surgeons or whatever, I don't care, it's all fine. So thank you very much.